Hello, I'm LaTonya Turner. As you've just seen, aging in place is no guarantee of a high quality of life, but there are things we can do to prepare for the life we want as we age. To help us explore what makes aging in place work, we've invited 3 professionals to share their perspectives and offer advice. First, Gretchen Napier, an aging life care manager who is founder and CEO of LifeLinks Care Management and Advocacy. Also, Dr. William Petrie, Director of the Geriatric Psychiatry Outpatient Program and Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Finally, Kathleen O Donohue, Executive Director of Folks at Home in Sewanee, Tennessee. Thank you all for being here. You know, one of the things that struck me in the documentary we just saw was a line that said that we should strive for what we really want is long-term care that conforms to us, rather than us trying to fit ourselves into some, predetermined long-term care formula. And that's kind of what people want with aging in place. They want independence, really, in a nutshell. That's what it's about. It's not about a place, it's about being independent, isn't it, Gretchen?
Well, and I think also we all like control. So it's about being able to make those decisions for ourselves instead of other people or the situation making the decisions for us.
Right, right. Talk a little bit about some of the concerns that factor into the cost of aging in place, because people think if I age in place, it's going to be less expensive. Just as you just said, I'm going to control my destiny. Right. Are those thoughts accurate?
And it can be. A lot of it depends on really what your needs are, how sick or frail or impaired you are, and then what other kind of support system you have around you. So if you have a lot of friends or family who can help provide free support, then it's not as costly. Generally, we advise our families that if you need about 10 hours of paid care at home per day, it becomes more cost effective to move to an assisted living facility, for example. The cost isn't the only factor, but that's kind of the break-even point.
10 hours a day?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Dr. Petrie, what are some of the well-being concerns that might be important to think about if someone wants to age in the place where they are now? What are some of the medical concerns?
Well, I think the first thing is people need to plan for the idea that they may live to be 85 years old, 85 or 90. When I see people in the office and they may be 70, 75, and I'll ask them how they're walking or whatever, what I tell them is we have to think about what you're going to be like in 10 years. So that you can't be 85 and start a walking program. You can't be 85 and maintain at that point some of your mobility, driving, that sort of thing. You have to be ready for it and plan in advance. I think the thing that makes an 85-year-old happy are the same things that make a 25-year-old happy. I think it's engagement, having activities that are meaningful, and as Gretchen said, having some control and direction in your life. The quality of life increases as you age if you can avoid getting sick.
It's a big if.
Yes.
But it sounds like what you're also saying is people kind of think of it in the moment, and rather than, as you said, 10 or 15 years down the road, is this setup going to work?
Yeah, and so that's why I believe that as people get older, that they have to increase their exercise, for example, because the medical benefits of exercise and fitness, and that's something that I always talk about, they increase with age. So a 90-year-old will get more benefit from fitness and exercise than an 89-year-old. So when they celebrate their 90th birthday, I announce to them, you've got to do more this year. And generally people come to the idea that when they hit certain thresholds, they're ready to coast.
Right.
And you got to keep pedaling.
Okay. That's a very good point. Good advice for any age, actually, isn't it? Kathleen, in a more rural area, people often don't have a choice, really, but to age in place. What are some of the challenges that you encounter in terms of helping people to navigate that process? Because they don't sometimes have a choice but to stay in the home they are in now.
That's true, and we don't have a plethora of resources or agencies or social services or healthcare providers. So those things are limited. And people have to really rely on each other and on the community that they're in much more. So what we do in our program is help connect people with volunteers, with vetted vendors, with people who are willing to exchange skills and services. And those connections are huge in a rural area.
Not to necessarily stereotype people in a rural area, but they probably are used to sort of being resourceful, aren't they? And maybe live a more active lifestyle like what Dr. Petrie just described. So maybe they're a little bit ahead of the game in some ways.
Well, I think it varies. You know, there are people are definitely aware that there's not something right around the corner. You know, you just can't walk to a grocery store. You can't walk to a this or a that. So people are used to being very creative and resourceful. You're right.
Okay. All right. We'll talk some more about how that translates into folks at home in just a moment. Gretchen, let's talk some about the resources that might be available in Middle Tennessee, Nashville in particular, if someone makes this decision to age in place. Where should they start?
Well, I think identifying the very specific needs that family situation has, as I mentioned, depending on how much support you have to identify really where your gaps are. So an aging life care manager, for example, can help you identify whether it's driving that's the most important thing, or healthy meal preparation, or medication management, so that you can begin to connect with the right resources. And then once you know what the problem is, we are pretty blessed in Middle Tennessee to have a lot of choices to help with all of those things, whether you want them brought to your home or you decide to age in place in a more congregate living situation.
What's the most common need?
Well, transportation is certainly a big need, which was identified in the documentary. And because that affects so many different things, it affects the socialization, which, you know, the studies have shown, and I think they talked about that in the documentary as well, that socialization is really important. And if you're isolated at home because you can't drive, that becomes important, but also getting your medications and going to the grocery store become really hard if you can't drive. So I think that usually ends up affecting more areas than just being able to drive.
But there are some things that I'm sure are safety concerns as well, and maybe even pose risk to people's health. Isn't that right, Dr. Petrie? I mean, we saw the 101-year-old lady who was frying and, you know, fixing her own meals and preparing all of that, and I was, you know, quite impressed. But that can also be a risk, and there can be hazards, correct?
You have to remember to turn the fire off on the stove, and there are lots of age-related changes that can really affect your ability to live in your house. For example, if you suddenly develop knee issues, you may not be able to get up the steps. There are hazards, thresholds for showers, other areas that can be problems. Now fitness helps that, and activity helps that, but there's no question that the safe abode for an older person is very different from what you might want at 50 or 60.
Realistically, do you think most people have an environment at age 70, age 75, and either of you can answer this, where they can age in place safely?
Well, I think that depends on a lot of other factors. I don't think people plan, I mentioned planning ahead. I don't think people plan ahead. I can live in this house until I'm 90 years old because it's on one floor, I've got a bedroom, I've got easy access, and I can get to the grocery store fairly easily, even if I have to get transportation. So that's the kind of planning I'm talking about. How much, what will you need as an older person, and how will you get it available? What communities can you be in so you can get medical care?
Okay. Gretchen, I saw you sort of shaking your head a little bit there. Do you think people are in an environment in most cases where they can safely
Well, certainly what we see is much more where people are really emotionally attached to their home. And so they may recognize that it has some limitations, but they just aren't willing to leave that emotional connection where they may have raised their children and had lots of family memories, and they've always had Thanksgiving at this table, for example. Makes it really hard to make that move. once they move, we see people making really good choices. So if they decide to downsize at 60, they are thinking ahead and choosing all one-level homes with wide doorways and grab bars in the bathroom and those kinds of things. But many people don't make that move at that time and just hold on to homes that really can be safety hazards.
I can see right now that we've got two sort of schools of thought here about aging in place, because some of us are talking about staying where you are at this moment until the end, but you're talking about being in an environment that you choose to be in. Are both aging in place?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Kathleen?
Yeah. It looks like everything.
Okay.
So,
And maybe that's something people need to be aware of,
Yes.
because of what you've already said. It may not be safe to stay where you are, but that doesn't mean you can't age in place, correct?
But the reality, I think, if you look at the numbers, most people are going to stay in their homes because of cost.
Okay.
That is the reality. And so what we've referred to before is trying to plan for your home, try to plan for your body to be as fit as possible. But there's a point, I know Gretchen and I both do home visits, you go in the home and that one step or that one threshold or that bathtub that you can no longer get in, there are adaptive equipment that you can use to help make the home safer. But for some people, that's the only option. And so how do we improve the quality of life in that situation?
And even that has a cost.
Absolutely.
And yes, Dr. Petrie.
Well, I think the other thing is so many of our communities and the way we build, for example, Nashville, Tennessee, built around the automobile. It's not built with the idea that you would
Pedestrian
ever walk to the grocery or that you would ever walk to school or be able to do that. I think as we look toward the future, and remember that 80-year-olds are the largest growing segment of our population. This is unprecedented in the history of mankind.
Wow.
We need to plan eventually so that we will have comfortable homes that will have these resources for us.
And describe that a little bit more. Are you talking about one-level homes? Even, I mean, what do you envision there when you're talking?
Well, one level is important, but I think being able to walk in any community is a positive thing.
To the grocery store,
Yes.
to the community
To your
center, to
school.
the exercise class, to the lesson.
So I think we have to start thinking about that. What kind of communities do we want to live in, and how can we accommodate them to a more healthy lifestyle? Because let me say, walking to the grocery, it's good for an 80-year-old. It's good for a 20-year-old too.
Yes, yes. All of these things we're talking about actually can apply to all of us. I want to go back to you, Kathleen, because we were talking about things that people might do to adapt their home. What are some of the things that are challenges for people when it comes to cost of these services, and how has your program helped people to deal with the cost of aging in place?
Well, simple things like we've all referred to. We'll go into the home and a person may think that they have to remodel their whole bathroom to make it accessible. And they don't have $10,000 or more to do that. And we can put in a tub transfer bench, a shower chair, a handheld shower, a commode frame to help them get up and down, have a walker available. There's grab bars. There's a lot of simple safety devices that can make a home livable in less than an hour and change that person's quality of life and extend their life so that they can stay in their home.
And what sort of financial support or resources or assistance do you provide? How do you manage the financial part of it? Because you all have come up with some creative ways to do that,
well,
correct?
With that program, we have an equipment exchange. In Nashville, there's an equipment exchange with United Cerebral Palsy. But we have a combination of services. We use volunteers to help provide some services. So I called a person the other day who's retired, and he is going to go in and install a grab bar and a handheld shower hose for a woman in her 90s who says, maybe I need one of those now. And so he's going to go in and talk to her about it and see if she wants to do that. And so that's a volunteer. We also have a time bank program, and that's a skills exchange network. So for example, I'm going to teach an hour of Tai Chi to Gretchen, And then Gretchen is going to drive Dr. Petrie to his clinic because his car's in the shop. And Dr. Petrie is going to give me a music lesson. And then you're going to cook a fabulous meal for Gretchen because you're a fabulous cook. Each hour is equal to an hour, and it doesn't mean I have to exchange equally with the person I exchange with, but it's like a credit union. You've put in an hour of time, you take out an hour of time, and that is something that helps people realize, even if you're homebound. I brought a stack of newsletters to a woman who's homebound. She can fold those newsletters, put them in the envelope, stamp them, and get them ready for me.
What an innovative idea. So who is keeping up? Someone is managing this, literally,
There's
like
actually software to manage the time exchanges.
You're not doing it.
I'm not doing it. No.
You're not the wizard sitting there.
And it also provides purpose and engagement for the volunteers, even if they didn't get the ride in exchange.
That's right.
Because there's so many people out there that need that connection and have lost it because they're no longer working.
And let's, from a wellness perspective, why is that important? Talk about that.
Well, because I think the issue of purpose, the issue of challenge, the issue of connection, these are very, very important for as you get older. And the limitations with aging are you don't hear as well, you don't see as well, maybe you don't walk as well, maybe your memory's not as good as it was. So the needs are still the same, but you've got these obstacles that you have to deal with. And if you can deal with that, these are the champions that I see, the people who, in spite of disabling arthritis, in spite of some cognitive impairment, they have a good quality of life, and they're connected, and they get to church, and they get to watch their grandchildren play soccer.
Okay. It also seems to me, Gretchen, that something like this would also be a little more palatable to people who have a certain level of pride about taking a handout.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, do you encounter that sometimes as an obstacle of someone wanting to stay in their home and not wanting to accept help and getting in trouble? And so if this exchange process with the time bank kind of overcomes that.
Absolutely, because then I've already given back. I've already paid my dues, so now it's okay for me to receive that help. We definitely see that. I think in general, our culture of independence encourages us to want to do it all ourselves, and we really sort of preach more of an interdependence. I know that was highlighted some as well, but being able to share the gifts and skills that we have when we're able to have them makes it more willing for us to receive those when we're the ones who need to receive.
Yes, yes. I love that idea. I'm just curious how much interest you might be getting. I mean, it started more or less because of I guess, need in a rural community like Sewanee, but that could apply in a lot of communities.
Absolutely.
Are you getting interest from other?
There are programs around the country and around the world, and what's really interesting is that the largest one in this country, when we started ours several years back, was the Visiting Nurses Association of New York, and in England, almost every medical clinic has one because of the engagement. So it does not matter that I have a disability. I can still do something, and whether that's tutor my neighbor's child or in the clinic and the Visiting Nurses Association, we know who all those people are, so we can help connect them and say, she could really use your music lesson. She could use you as a tutor. So we can help connect those people. We've done that in our community. There's 2 retired couples, and they take someone to therapy who needs to go to therapy a couple times a week. They love it. They have become part of this family, and they would never have known these people, all of them.
And I think you touched on this, that it's really about filling a need in an underserved area, but underserved areas are right in the heart of cities as well. I'm sure there are seniors in the heart of Nashville who are struggling with having enough resources too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So you could see something like that.
Yes, I think it would be a great program to offer here.
Let's talk some about technology and how that can really sort of make this whole process a little more efficient and effective of aging in place. What are some of the things that are out there?
Well, I think the good news is technology is really evolving to be more user-friendly. So what we used to see was more of a monitoring system, or either the pendant where you push the button if you needed help, or motion
I
detectors.
fall and I can't get up.
That's right, that's right. Or the motion detectors that a lot of our clients felt like was too big brotherish and their children checking up on them. And there's a new local company called Evermind that plugs into your coffee maker or your lamp, so I can know Mom is up because her coffee maker is going, or she's gone to bed now because the light has gotten turned off. Or there's also another new service called Remo that's remote control for all of the home safety, or the home smart home devices. You can tell I don't do this. But
Yeah.
so you can turn a light on and off, or you can answer the phone without having to walk across the room.
Oh.
Now, I know Dr. Petrie might get mad at me for saying that you don't have to walk across the room, but
It's one step above the clapper, right?
but for Mrs. Jennings, for example, in the video, who is just slow in getting to the
Yes,
phone
right.
before it stops ringing, can be difficult. So if she can stay at home longer and still connect with people by answering the phone with a remote device, then that will help her quality of life and allow her to stay at home longer.
So there are these things that are showing up, evolving, or technological advancements, I guess, that are really geared toward this concept, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And,
Okay.
you know, we were talking about how just even a walker is a technology that we didn't have 100 years ago. So it's evolving in ways that do make the day-to-day living safer and also just more productive. So they can stay at home.
And Kathleen, I hear you agreeing with a lot of this. What are your views on
Well,
on this?
another one that she just mentioned made me think of, there are portable ramps, folding portable suitcase ramps.
Oh.
And we have several of those in our equipment exchange, and that can change a person's life the minute we walk in the door with it, because the person has one step and the spouse cannot get out of the wheelchair to walk, and we can put that ramp in, and suddenly they can get to their outside porch, like you saw in the
Oh.
documentary. That's
So
a
it
little,
unfolds. I mean, describe it.
it's a sturdy. It can hold a power chair. It can hold hundreds of pounds of weight, but it folds in half. It has a little handle, and you can get them in different lengths. And you saw that in the documentary, that we put one so that he can go out into the back porch, another one so they can get up and down the front step. And that's a simple technology that changes lives.
And you believe these things are important for people to research and utilize.
Oh,
and be
yes,
aware of.
and as Gretchen referred to, a lot of durable medical equipment is advanced technology that has changed people's lives, from simple walkers, canes, wheelchairs. You see people with walking sticks. It keeps people mobile and safer from falls.
I would like to just say something important about installing those things, to be sure to really get an expert at installing those. I mean, grab bars, anybody can hang a grab bar, but if it's not in the safe place with studs and all of that, it can really be more unsafe. So
I was going to ask a question that I think you could probably address along these lines of, with this burgeoning marketplace around devices and technology for aging in place, I'm sure there are some consumer warnings that might be appropriate. So one you just gave of having an expert install devices that need to be installed, but what else?
Sure. Well, and so there are certified aging in place specialists, which are kind of builders that have that expertise. There are other qualified people who can do it, but just be careful about that. And sometimes ramps we see where, a son-in-law built it, and I'm sure he did a fine job, but the grade is a little steep for somebody on a walker. So it is great to be able to consult experts about that.
Technology is great.
I was going to give you your chance.
You have to
Dr.
have
Petrie.
good quadriceps.
That's right.
And in fact,
Yes.
you can correlate strength of quadriceps with how alert and how cognitively active people remain. You got to have good leg muscles, and that will be the deal breaker for most people. Not that they don't have all this fancy stuff. This is great, but that it's too dangerous for them to walk, that they are too much of a fall risk, that they fell and broke their hip or fell and hit their head and they're on Plavix and they got all this bad stuff. You got to keep walking about a mile a day.
These things, would you say, are supplements, or do you
Absolutely,
think?
yeah.
Okay, there's
That's great.
nothing
That's
bad
great.
about them.
No,
but-
except for TV.
Uh-oh.
Sorry. TV
We're almost out
is
now.
bad.
Go ahead. Go ahead and explain
Well,
what you mean.
let me say, when I talked about planning.
Yes.
A lot of people, when they think of getting older, it involves watching a lot of television. And I think that's absolutely terrible. That in fact, watching more than 4 hours of television a day increases type 2 diabetes, increases heart disease, increases all-cause mortality. So
Because you're sedentary.
Exactly.
Not
That's
because
part
of,
of
the
it.
programming.
Well, that's part of it. It's part of it. But it is, so watch your favorite show, especially if it's on Channel 8.
Yes.
But don't spend all day in front of the TV.
Okay, that's a very good point. I really think it's important to emphasize again the connection to cognitive function.
Yes.
Just restate that.
Fitness improves cognitive function.
Okay.
People who are able to walk, who have good leg muscles, they have better cognition because of
And we're talking about just, memory and being able to
Absolutely.
converse, and
Absolutely.
that's what you're
Absolutely.
saying.
There are substances that your brain produces with fitness that increases memory, neurotropic factors, that growth factors that really help thinking, memory, and learning.
Okay, excellent.
And cognitive skills are involved in driving, in grocery shopping, in figuring out your day-to-day activities. That
Okay.
requires a good brain.
And in staying engaged and socially aware. And that brings me to something I just want to talk about quickly before we wrap up, and that's the concept of aging in place versus aging in community. How do we, and I'll let each of you kind of weigh in on this, is that an important concept to grasp? And what is the difference? How do we achieve aging in community so that we don't have people sort of isolated and shut off in this place that they want to age?
Well, and I think that an ideal plan would include that, would include how I'm going to have purpose to help other people, how I'm going to include other people in my life so that we are sharing these mutual benefits. Aging in community would be a much better quality for all of us.
What do you?
Well, and remember too that when we talk about these aging in place, most of them will be women. They're overrepresented. And people will not come and knock on their door unless they just did some job sharing with Kathleen. But for the most part, you've got to get out. You've got to extend yourself. You can't sit back the way you did when you were younger. So it requires a lot more activity, initiative, and as community people, we have to assist with some of this.
And I was going to ask, what do people who aren't necessarily the elder need to do? Or would you like to see them do to make sure we're aging in community?
Well, I think about Dr. Thomas, Dr. Bill and Jude Thomas both teach the 3 plagues that most elders suffer from, is loneliness, helplessness, and boredom. And you have to intentionally create community. Aging in place does not magically create connection, and whether that's connection with a plant, gardening, animals, people, and that has to be a conscious intention to create community.
That's a great point. We all have to make this happen so that it can work successfully. We're out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope you have benefited from our discussion on aging in place. If you'd like more information on this and future programs about aging in our community, go to wnpt.org/Aging Matters. Thanks for watching.
Major funding for NPT Reports Aging Matters is provided by Cigna Health Spring, lead sponsor of NPT Reports Aging Matters. Cigna Health Spring, helping customers get more from Medicare and more from life. The West End Home Foundation, support in the care of seniors through many organizations in Middle Tennessee. The HCA Foundation, on behalf of TriStar Health. The Jeanette Travis Foundation, dedicated to improving the health and well-being of the Middle Tennessee community. Additional funding provided by the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee and by members of NPT. Thank you.